Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Finance Town Hall. Before we get started, we're going to go through a few housekeeping items, which we've also listed on the next slide. So we will be recording today's session so that it can be available to others following this event. All attendees have been placed on mute. We are going to address questions throughout the meeting, and you'll see moments we've marked for specific questions. We also will have a general Q&A at the end of the event. So if you have questions along the way for presenters, please use the Q&A function that's available in Zoom. And if you need to send a message, you should be able to reach the host as well. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our host for the event, Mike Gower, Executive Vice President, Chief Financial Officer, and University Treasurer. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning, Erin, and good morning, everyone. I'm glad that you joined us for the Finance Town Hall this morning. I hope this will be of great value to you. A lot of good topics. Let's go over the agenda forward. First, I'm going to talk, as I have been recently, on trends in higher education, the most timely one having to do with FAFSA implementation issues, and I'll go through that in a few minutes. Following that, we'll have an overview of new policies regarding service center and core facilities, research core services, and then following that, fiscal year 24 forecast and information on budget development for fiscal 25. As Erin said, we'll wrap up with a general Q&A session and then conclude. Please send in questions. You can get those to Erin and we will amass them as we go along. We'll also open up time for that after each session. So let's get started. As I noted in previous town halls, I've focused trend section on general and high-level issues in higher education. This time I'm going to focus on a recent specific issue with broad implications. This is around FAFSA, which stands for the free application for student aid, free application for federal student aid, excuse me. This is a form that has been used year after year after year after year to get basic information that colleges and universities can use to package financial aid and to understand eligibility for things such as student loans. A few years ago, the Congress passed an act requiring simplification of the FAFSA. It was a complex form. It was something that then required you to put together a lot of documents and provide those so that they could then be processed and need could be established. The intent of this act was not only to simplify the form itself, but to allow for the information that had been captured before by sending in forms, such as tax returns, to flow directly from the Internal Revenue Service so that families wouldn't have to go through those extra steps. And while that is a laudable goal, it was a challenge. I was at a conference last October, and the Undersecretary of the U.S. Department of Education was talking about this process. And he said, imagine when you have systems projects at your own institutions, what are the difficulties in integrating data from different groups and different systems? And then just imagine doing that with the Internal Revenue Service, even though it's within the government. They were having significant challenges, both in working with the Internal Revenue Service, but also in what to do with the data after that. So it had issues from the very beginning. Normally, a student would be available, have this form available to him or her in October to fill out, as that student is doing applications, and so that information would flow into the Department of Education and be available for the institutions that would accept that student to allow for packaging in financial aid. Well, October came and went, and it was not available. There were glitches after glitches after glitches. This is just to get to the application form. Ultimately, that launch was pushed to late December of 23, and well past the time that families would normally use for that. Then there were glitches and more glitches. There were fixes made to the portal, but it still wasn't available 24/7 until at least January the 8th. Again, this is supposed to have happened in October. There were also additional delays in terms of how the Department of Education would calculate the need. It used to be called estimated family contribution. Now it's called the student aid index. And that calculation was supposed to take into account inflation and therefore be able to work up as inflation worked up. In the first pass, the Department of Education had failed to do that indexing. And so therefore, the information that applicants would put in and then it would spit out to institutions went through and blew through a number of deadlines, first at the end of January, then February, and then finally the deadline was given the second half of March in this month. We got around to March 15th, which to me is the middle of March, and we started to get test records. Those test records had some issues, but they were it was at least progress. Actually working through some of those issues happened pretty well. And then we started to get major quantities of records in. For Rutgers University as a whole, and this is for all units, we have approximately 58,000 students for whom this matters, for whom having a FAFSA and getting one of these student aid indexes matters, whether it be for Pell Grants, whether it be for state-based grants, whether it be for internal grants, other external grants, whether it be for eligibility for student loans. So 58,000 of these that we would need to process. This is still an issue, and to the point in the point in the chat there. No, information is not yet available to the applicants. I'm saying that the information has just gotten to the universities to process. The universities then have to process all those records and then provide aid packages to individuals. Because of all these delays, we did a number of things. We delayed the priority application deadline to the middle of March, instead of having a decision date on May the 1st. In other words, when we would expect to get we would expect to get an answer back from students that they would be wanting to come to Rutgers. That was pushed off to June the 1st. We had to provide room for us to take these and package them together. As of this weekend, or as of yesterday, we've now received over 50,000 of those 50,000 records. Testing is going okay. There are still some data issues. Just the other day, there was a notice that one smaller group of students, but maybe as many as 10 to 15%, maybe a little more, of individuals would have the incorrect student aid index because of a miscalculation. So those are having to be reprocessed and to come back and test those. We are testing every record. We're running them through the system and making sure that they make sense on the other end. This is going to take several weeks It is not something that as soon as we get the record, we can run it and turn it and give it right back out to students. In fact, we are looking for, hoping to get the information out by the end of April, so as to give students opportunity to look at what we are offering to them and to make decisions about their college future. There are a lot of things that are concerning about this to us. This was the first year that we adopted the common application. That increased our number of applications dramatically at each of our units. And we were looking at a real opportunity to have a banner year in working through the application process. This, of course, delayed that. And what is also concerning, though, is also that many fewer families have submitted their FAFSA information than we normally would be seeing at this time. As of beginning of March, there was a 38% drop in families filling out the FAFSA compared to prior years. So that's very concerning, because if people don't put that in, we can't do anything about providing appropriate aid. So there's a lot of campaigns out to make sure that people get their FAFSA information in. It's still not too late. You can get the FAFSA information in and be able to process it and get it into our cycle. Again, we are going to be spending several weeks making sure that the data are correct, making sure our packages are correct. This will be an iterative process between the Central Financial Aid Office and the financial aid functions, the enrollment management functions across the chancellor-led units. But we want to make sure to get it right so that when we put out information to students, prospective students, that it's the right stuff. It also applies to returning students. So this is not just for individuals who are choosing to come to Rutgers, it's for individuals who are already here. It is a majority of our programs, not every one, but it's a majority of our programs. For those programs that don't require FAFSA information, we've already provided the process by which those financial aid packages or the processing of those things can happen. But this is a mess, and it has been one that really is concerning because of especially that drop in potential students who might have aid available to them. But again, if they don't fill out the form, we wouldn't be able to package for that. And the delay in getting this information out to individuals. So we are going to be pushing these things as quickly as we can, but want to make sure that we get them right. I'm encouraged by the fact that we've already got over 50 of the 58,000, but the testing is critical. And since we've already identified one set, and this is across all of the Department of Education's data sets, one set that has some issues, we've got to be attentive to that as we go forward. It is also unclear whether, if we've gotten 50,000, what have other institutions received? They were done in batches. They weren't done by, let's give the information about this individual student to every institution that he or she applied to. No, it was a full batch just for Rutgers, another batch for the next institution, batch for the next institution. So we don't know where other institutions may be in their process. We do know that most institutions delayed the commit date to the latter part of May or the beginning of June, as we did. So if we can do better than that and get information out faster, we will, but it is a real set of issues for us. So that's the concern. It is a day-to-day thing. I watched the news feeds, the higher education news feeds, for instance, just to make sure that I know what's coming down the line. Our financial aid folks, whether they be centrally or in the chancellor units, are keeping abreast of this, are getting information from their associations who are following this carefully. And we are hoping for the best, but planning to really push to get things right for our prospective and continuing students. So with that, Aaron, I'm going to kick it back to if there are any questions at this point, or we can have questions about it later on in the program.
Yes, Mike, we've received 2 questions or comments, so.
Yes.
Starting, so the first is, if a family did not complete the FAFSA application by the March 15th deadline, would it be too late to complete it now?
No. Get it out, get it in as much as you can. There are issues on some individual students, and they have to do with status, immigration status, and a number of other factors. Those are important to understand, and for if need be, to work with the Department of Education to understand the issues there. But no, people should go ahead and get their information in.
Okay, and the other is actually a comment about how FAFSA is not getting the information needed to applicants. So both parents and others are receiving the message about checking back for corrections.
Yeah,
I don't know if you have any comment on that end of the spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, this has been to the individual writing that. I agree. This has been an absolute disaster of the Department of Education's making, and unfortunately, it got so delayed that it's pushed into the critical time. All I can say is that be checking it as you noted there. Thank you for that. Checking to review what has gone in and see what happens. As it said, there are some known issues and workarounds that have been developed, especially if on immigration status of one or more parents, for instance. But it's important to keep going through and checking on the status. Is it possible that a student could be advised of aid from one school and not Rutgers because of the situation? Yes, that's possible. More around the timing. So it might be possible that because of when the records came to an institution for an individual, that they are able to, instead of getting them all at once, like is normally the case, we're getting them in batches, and we don't know where we are in the whole process. It's possible that somebody could get an aid package from an institution before we're able to do so, which is why we're pushing as fast as we can. But we just don't even know where we might be in that situation, and we won't know for a few weeks.
Okay, that's it for questions for now, Mike.
Okay. Well, be happy to look at more later, but note up here that there are 2 important programs. One is the Cornerstone Open Forum on April the 1st, which is next Monday, 2:30 to 4. I will be commenting on any news, any new information about this process or our processes with the FAFSA at that time. So stay tuned for that. And then NACUBO, the National Association of College and University Business Officers, is holding a webinar today with individual from U.S. Department of Education at 2 o'clock. The institution is a member, so anybody on this call who would like to attend that can sign up to do so. And it will be, again, up-to-date information, but this is something that, there's new stuff every day that we're discovering, some of it good and some of it not good. Okay, so next we want to get some updates. Next slide. So we have two presenters today, and I appreciate them being here. One is Chea Smith. She's the Associate Controller of Cost Analysis, Reporting and Property Management. Chea is individual responsible for, among many things, F&A, fringe cost, but also compliance on service centers, and how billing is done with service centers as it relates to federal regulations. So thank you for being with us, Chea. We also have today Jeetendra Eswaraka. He is the University Vice President for Core Services in the Office for Research. G2 has previously been the Associate VP for Rutgers Animal Care Program, has brought a tremendous amount of value and experience to this university, and put our animal care programs on a very high path. But as now, thanks to all his good work, has been given more responsibility to working around university core services. So G2, we're happy to have you with us. I believe Chea is starting. Is that correct? Thank you.
Yes. Thanks, Mike, for mentioning all the work I have to do once this meeting is over. So, good morning, everyone. Just wanted to come in and give what we think is good news and talk about our new policy on service centers. Many out in the field have, had conversations with, my area or Office for Research about service centers, core facilities. And we're happy that we now have a policy approved. So I just kind of want to level set for all of those here about what a service center is. It's basically just an operating unit at the institution that provides a good or service internally, and many times in support of research activities. They occur it's a recurring basis. It's not something that it's happening like a one-time deal. One department is doing something for another department, or vice versa, just one time. It's something that's happening on a regular basis. The customers are primarily internal, so other departmental users, or incidentally, the activity can happen with external entities that find a use for the good or service that's being provided. And then there is a fee. The fee is really where the point of contention and a lot of the concentration is when we are looking at units such as these, because we're recovering costs for those goods or services. Next slide. So internal charging units here at Rutgers, some may have seen these definitions in previous guidance that has been provided over the last few years while we awaited the finalization of the policy. So here at Rutgers, these are the main three internal charging units that we are discussing that are subject to this policy, this new policy. They all are providing a good or service. They are all providing services to sponsored awards and sponsored activities. They can be academic or non-academic. The difference between the three really is the level of service of what they're providing. If you're a recharge unit and your annual activity doesn't exceed $25,000, we do a rate review, but it's not subject to the extra oversight and approval process that the university has for the other two categories. Those are mostly non-academic in nature, but it does not mean that they could not provide services to sponsor programs. For service centers and core facilities, you'll hear them called research cores, you'll hear them called many, many things, but the basic definition is really the same. However, their activity exceeds 25,000 in an annual year. They are primarily providing services to research activities and can have some activities to external entities outside of the institution. Their rates would just include the cost of what it is in order for those units to provide that service. So any, salary, supplies, and those types of things are what we use to provide those services. And then the specialized service facilities are really the more complex, high dollar equipment and have a lot of, expenditures to federal awards. So in all three of these cases, these entities are subject to the new policy that has been approved. And within our new policy, you'll see that we also mention the fee-for-service units, centers and institutes, and auxiliary service units with definitions, but those entities are not subject to this new policy. Next slide. So there's a lot of federal guidance surrounding these activities because many of the service centers are expending on federal awards that the institution is receiving. There are several federal guidelines surrounding what can and cannot be charged to a sponsored award. And so we follow the same guidelines that you find in uniform guidance. And if you, need some late night reading one night and you can't go to sleep and you want to just know everything there is to know about service centers, we've provided some extra links to you to find out about service centers, what they are, what you can and can't do. So you know that when we give guidance that we are basing all of that on these types of federal guidelines and best practices. A lot of this drives the processes and procedures that we put in place in order to avoid any improprieties, to show that we have internal controls and that we are not double charging the federal government. Next slide. As a recipient of federal sponsored funding, Rutgers must provide assurances that we have a system of internal controls, which is why we follow the rules and regulations found at the previous links that we provided. Some of the things that, are looked for when awards or during single audit or even our financial audit that our auditors may look at, they're trying to make sure that our sponsors aren't being double charged. They don't want to pay for something that they're already paying for. We all, know that there's F&A related to sponsored awards. There are certain costs that are included in the calculation of that rate. So they want to make sure that we're not direct charging them for those expenses and then applying an F&A rate that already has those expenses included. So part of the rate review is making sure that we have segregated those costs and we're not double charging any of the customers, that including the federal government. We want to make sure that the costs are consistent with the operation of the service center. They can't just throw the full bucket of everything of their departmental expenses into the rate calculation. What's in those rates must be necessary in order to provide the good or service. We have a review process of rates. If you have one of these, you've seen me or my former colleague, George Coco, or maybe you will meet my new colleague who we have finally filled that position after a long time. Brianna Wilkerson, who goes through the process and reviews these rates at the inception and then every 2 years. Again, the effort is that the service center breaks even. It's not a revenue generating unit. It's not a mini, corporate business where you can, have a lot of surplus and subsidized like your departmental operations. These are supposed to be designed to break even for multiple reasons, including, our institution is a nonprofit, and thus we can't have revenue generating units inside of the institution that could put our tax status in jeopardy. So there are reviews, including a review by the tax office at the initial approval of a service center or core facility unit. We have a process to identify and correct units. We are working through those. G2 will talk about this. We just went through a huge internal audit and we found some issues. We found some good things, but we also found some issues. So we're working on our processes to make sure that we can support and have the infrastructure to monitor and review these on a regular basis. And then that there is a policy and or procedure guidance, which again, we've had guidelines for quite a few years. The policy document echoes a lot of the things that was in that document that we had. But now we actually have an approved policy as of a few weeks ago. I'm very excited about it. It only took a few years to get that, but that's normal. So next slide. So this is kind of just a visual of the operational challenges when you have an institution, not just of our size, but the complexities that come with that. And, you know, there's a finance piece to service centers. There's a compliance piece, regulations and guidelines we have to follow, and then the actual business operations of the units. And at those intersections, you find different issues. And this is really just a visual of what that looks like in the complexities of instituting something like this at an institution and trying to put rules and regulations around the activity. Some to mention, you know, at the unit level, we want to make sure that they're invoicing properly, that they are collecting when they bill, so that they are not in a constant deficit, that they're not billing, providing services for free. We want to make sure that they are, you know, charging the rates that have been approved. That is very important. And that those rates don't discriminate against federal awards. The feds require that they receive the most favorable rate. So when calculating these rates, we want to ensure that we're not charging any other users less than we're charging the federal government. You know, we have to think about the costs, you know, and we ultimately just want to stay solvent in business. There's budget concerns, there's operational concerns, and then the compliance expectations of the institution and the sponsors that are paying for these services. So again, this is just a quick visual to kind of show the complexities and challenges, especially at an institution of this size, and the various services that are provided by these units on our campus. Next slide. So the new policy, 40.2.25. This is a quick snippet from the top of that policy that is now available. If you go to our university policy library and search for service centers, you'll come up with this policy. It includes like definitions. So the previous definitions I showed about recharge units and service center core facilities and specialized service facilities. Those definitions are included and were copied from this policy. There is a policy statement. We talk about the approval process, and we talk about how we review the rates, how we, you know, how frequently we have to review them and what the process is. We talk about the need to break even over time, which is a requirement, again, of our federal guidance and as an institution of higher education that is nonprofit status. We also talk about the pricing between user types. I talked about that just a few minutes ago, making sure that the feds receive the most favorable rate. We in that talk about subsidies. None of these things really make a lot of money, but they are important to the mission of the institution. So we talk about subsidies that are provided from the school department level in order to provide these services. And then in our accounting procedures, which is a separate document, but also available, we talk about how these are accounted for at our institution. Next slide. So here, we just provide the link to where you can find this policy. Again, we're very excited to have it, and there will be more information coming out about it. I believe later today, and then in the coming weeks, as you know, our office works with the Office for Research to put together some standard training and information availability. And then the accounting for service centers and core facilities is out on the UFA website, accounting procedures as well. So if you are looking for where those are, I believe they were being put, the links were being put in the chat, but they're also here in the slides that will be provided later on. Next slide. And I'll turn it over to Jeetu.
Thank you, Chea. First off, I want to thank Mike and the UFA team for inviting me to speak today. Also, all of you that are on the call, thanks for taking the time to attend the town hall today. So I'd start off by talking about our vision and mission for the Office for Research. Our Office for Research seeks to be the most innovative and trusted research office among all research universities. And we plan to do this with our mission statement, and we live by it, which is the Rutgers Office for Research supports the research, scholarship, and creative endeavors of all Rutgers faculty. And while executing on this mission, next slide, please. We follow the following values, which is respect for everyone, simplicity, collaboration, and excellence. And this particular policy itself is a testament to our collaborative spirit, because we worked a lot with UFA to develop these policies. And I envisioned us collaborating a lot with the research leaders across all campuses to execute these two policies. Next slide, please. So our vision for core services is when core facilities get started, everybody starts off with the vision of that we want to provide cutting edge technologies and expertise in a cost-effective manner. But what gets missed more often is about operational efficiency, financial management, and being transparent, data-driven operation. We hope to change that in the future. Next slide, please. What is the state of Rutgers core services at this point? Before these policies were implemented, we had a very outdated core policy, which was dated back to 2013. Faculty complain a lot about lack of accessibility to research cores within the campuses. And many of the cores are right now suffering from financial sustainability because of lack of clear funding models. And then many of the equipment is outdated, which places all of these cores at risk for closing and affecting research productivity. Next slide. So as Chea had mentioned, recently there was an audit conducted by Audit Services, and we had several recommendations. One of the first ones being that we needed an updated and accurate inventory of all Rutgers research cores. We needed to provide more clarity in governance structure and roles and responsibilities for how these core facilities are going to be managed, as well as a requirement for more documentation on the biennial rate reviews that is required by the federal government. Next slide. So the Office for Research Policy, which is 90.3.1, it defines, what does it talk about? It defines the different Rutgers research cores, also provides some language on what are the roles and responsibilities of UFA, Office for Research, as well as the chancellor units or school units in governing the cores. It also provides an outline on how the research cores governance structure should be set up, as well as how to start or decommission a core when it is non-viable. This research core service policy is a companion to the service center policy that Chea just talked about. Next slide. So the core policy defines two types of core facilities. One is a centrally managed one, and the other is a locally managed one. A centrally managed core is one which is run as a partnership between the Office for Research and one or more chancellor units or schools or institutes. It is governed by an executive oversight committee, which will be constituted of people from the units that are funding the core facility. And it'll have a clear MOU that defines where the money is going to come from, how much subsidy will be provided, how much the core is expected to recover. And one of the requirements is that these cores need to have a major user group of faculty so that the faculty have an opportunity to provide input on how the core facility is managed. In terms of the operation of the centrally managed core, the finances at the website would be managed by Office for Research. The staff as well as the space is assigned to the Office for Research. And these cores are required to use iLab, which is a third-party software for management of cores, so that all the invoicing, service requests, everything is done through that core, through that software, and easy to track. A locally managed core, on the other hand, the local school or unit can determine the strategy for the core, as well as provide oversight for the core facility. The local school can determine the type of user groups for that core, and they will manage the finances as well as website for the core facility. The staff will be reporting to the local unit as the RCM space is assigned to the local unit. Use of iLab software is recommended, but not mandatory. Regardless of whether you're a centrally managed core or a locally managed core, there are certain things which are common. All of them must have an approved rate structure that UFA has reviewed and approved. There needs to be a business plan. Each core has to have a standard operating procedure as well as a core director. We understand this can be a little bit of a challenge because people might not know how to set up business plans, as well as how to come up with a approved a proper rates calculation. The Office for Research will help you if you're a local core to put together a business plan as well as calculate your rates, and we would then present it to UFA so that it can be approved. Next slide. So what are the next steps for implementing these policies? As you can see, it's going to be a partnership between the chancellor level units and Office for Research. Currently, we are communicating these updates to the policy to the entire Rutgers community, and we're developing some training material so that we can educate the core directors, and we will be doing this in partnership with Chea's team. We hope in the next 12 to 14 months, we'll have this policies fully implemented. And we've set a deadline, aggressive deadline of July 1, 2025 for that. Next slide. So the potential topics we have identified for education and training of the core directors include uniform guidance and core compliance, research core finance 101, developing a business plan, how to use the iLab software, how to develop your rates, and then what is the process in developing the rates. We'll help you to figure out how to develop and work with major user groups, as well as setting up an executive oversight committee for the core. We are open to any other topics that units might think about in terms of developing the training material. Next slide. So currently we are doing this university-wide announcement, which is supposed to go out either today or tomorrow. And then we have been communicating with the research leaders across campuses. Next, we will set up some meetings with faculty to communicate this and the business leaders. And once the core materials, training materials are developed in the summer, we'll start the discussion of the current and future core directors so that we can start the training program. Next slide. I think that was the last one. Thank you. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you, Chea and Jeetu. These are really important policies around our development of research capabilities at the university. We really need to, sorry, I forgot to turn my camera back on. We really need to be able to provide these services, but do it in a fashion that keeps us in good compliance with federal regulations. And those are not mutually exclusive. It's very important that we plan so that those two can work well together. And Chea and Jeetu are in fact doing that work between the University Finance Administration and the Office for Research. And I'm very proud of the collaboration and teamwork that's been going on to put this together. So, Aaron, are there any questions for our two speakers, please?
Yes. So I'm going to start at the beginning. Can a recharge unit charge internally now? For example, SEBS has a recharge center, and the department with the recharge center cannot charge another department to use an item that is available within SEBS, but they can charge a different school's faculty because those schools are not part of the unit.
I'll take that. So if you are a recharge unit that has been reviewed, you've had rates reviewed and approved, we don't have any type of limitation on who internally can be charged. So I'm a little bit confused about that. Whomever had that question, if you could send me an email, then maybe we can discuss that offline, because that's a little bit confusing because we don't have any type of limitation on who can be charged at this time. Again, that's if you are a unit that has been reviewed. and designate it as a recharge unit. So, and if you haven't, email me anyway. So let's have a talk.
Okay, Chea, another one that I think came through during your presentation. Can you repeat your statement about a revenue generating unit within UFA?
Yes,
If you
so it's very important. One of the other reasons beyond the federal charging compliance guidelines that we have to follow is that the institution itself, Rutgers University, is a 501c3 nonprofit institution. So when these units are approved, we have to monitor to make sure that they are not revenue generating a lot of surplus. Again, as a nonprofit, we are not allowed to do that. And those activities are reviewed and approved annually by the tax office for UBIT reasons, UBIT being unrelated business income tax. So a review of any revenue generation for the institution is reviewed annually for tax purposes. So for these units, that's one of the reasons we want to ensure that we are breaking even and we review their revenue and expenses and the rates that they are charging on a biennial basis.
So it wasn't about revenue producing units in UFA.
Correct. Yeah, not just
UFA,
UFA, but across the entire
UFA,
institution.
in particular, Shea's group reviews those for units throughout the university.
Correct.
Great, thank you, Chea and Mike. G2, this one is for you. I'm going to combine two questions. First, does the Office for Research also serve Rutgers staff research initiatives or just faculty? And second, how do students find research opportunities and where would they find them?
So we are here to serve everyone who wants research resources within the university. And in terms of the students, typically most of the research opportunities are through individual PIs departments. But we do have opportunities that within the core facilities that you would reach out to. I mean, I'm happy to work with whoever asks that question to figure out what they're looking for exactly, because there are several student research opportunities that are available within the university.
Thanks, G2. This question is for, well, I'll let you all decide because I think you can both answer it well. Can a standing PO be established with a core or service center? Maybe it's a Mike question that would be paid down throughout the year. Let me repeat that. Can a standing PO be established with a core or service center that would be paid down throughout the year?
If you are creating a PO, like you want to purchase a certain number of services in a year, within a particular year or fiscal year, each unit can make that order. I know if you're using iLab, you would make that order and then payments would be made on a scheduled basis. And G2, please correct me if I'm wrong, you can set it up that way. You're really not supposed to pay for services or goods that you're getting in advance, if that makes sense. You're not supposed to prepay because you want to make sure, especially when being billed to a sponsored award, that you are not paying for services before they are received. Just like if you put a PO in that was to be paid by a grant, it doesn't actually get billed to the sponsor until the service or good that you purchased is received. So the same concept applies. If you are using the IPO supplier system, I would defer to procurement, but I would think that it's the same process. But again, if you want to email me after, I can try to get some more information surrounding that. I would say email me and G2, and I'm going to throw Todd's name in here, Todd Slosky, who's a lot more familiar with the iLab process than I am. And so, yeah, if you want to reach out to us after, we can get you a definitive answer, but I don't see why that would be an issue. But again, you wouldn't pay for those services until they are received, even if you put a PO in place.
And add what Chea said, within iLab, after each service request, you can actually put in steps of different orders, basically. And as each order is completed, is only then it is invoiced for that particular piece. It's not for the entire requisition.
Thank you. We have two more questions, but also one more presentation. So I wonder if we might move on to David's and then return to the two remaining questions during our general Q&A.
Yes, and also we will post answers to all the questions, including ones that we weren't able to answer directly, such as the one that was just posed. We'll post those with the meeting materials after the fact. So thank you again, Chea and G2. Appreciate your going over this, and hang around. We might have some more questions for you later. Next, I want to turn over to David Moore, Vice President for Financial Planning and Analytics, and our Chief Budget Officer, to share some updates about the current year finances and FY25 budget development. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Mike. Thank you. And welcome, everyone. For the FY24 budget, I want to kind of cover the FY22 or 24 Q2 forecast, usually referred to as the Q2 forecast. And that is a forecast that is done after 6 months of actuals and then projects the remaining 6 months of the fiscal year. Next slide. Thank you. The FY24 budget and forecast reflects the values of Rutgers University in fulfilling its core priorities of teaching, research, service, and patient care. The budget and forecast reflects a statement of our priorities while taking steps to preserve access and affordability for our students. Next step. Next slide. This slide will show the difference from the fiscal year 2024 budget and the Q2 forecast, or what is known as the Q2 forecast. The FY24 Q2 forecast is approximately $5.4 billion, which projects to spend approximately 77% on our core missions of student instruction, research, public service, and patient care. As we go to the next category, about 15% is projected to be spent on operations and maintenance for facilities and supportive administration. And approximately, or an estimated 5% is projected to be spent on auxiliary enterprises, which primarily includes housing, dining, and parking operations, along with other small auxiliary or ancillary activity. And approximately 3% is projected to be spent on athletics. Next slide, please. So now let's explore some of the categories for a deeper understanding. Together, the items on this slide represents the core mission of student instruction, service, research, public service, and patient care that accounts for approximately $4.1 billion, or 77% of the forecast. Our core missions are made up of the following. So classroom instruction and academic support, which makes up just over a third of the projected forecast. This includes faculty compensation, staff support for academic units, libraries, and dean's offices. It comprises approximately 35% of the budget and the forecast, or $1.9 billion. This budget strives to support and advance Rutgers' high-quality instruction and academic excellence. Student services and scholarships comprises 12% of the estimated amount. That would total $626.6 million. This projection preserves and increases investments in student financial aid. In addition, the projection supports student services and social and cultural events for our students across all campuses. Sponsored research and other sponsored programs make up approximately 13% of the projection, or $672.6 million of the forecast, and includes funds spent on research and activities associated with federal, state, and non-governmental grants and contracts. Public service, extension, and patient care is estimated at 17% of the projection, and is, or $933.7 million of the FY22 Q2 forecast, and supports the agricultural extension programs, delivery of healthcare, support of health clinics, and community services provided throughout the state. Next slide, please. Rounding out the remaining 23% of the annual projected budget Administration and operations, which includes support for central administrative offices such as research administration, finance, human resources, procurement, for examples, as well as supports the Rutgers facilities, including all Rutgers buildings. That includes costs like insurance, fuel, upkeep, and utility costs. Accounts for slightly over approximately 15% of the Q2 forecast. Auxiliary enterprises includes all housing and at all campuses, dining services and operations at each campus, as well as parking operations, and is estimated at approximately 5% of the Q2 forecast. And rounding out the athletics, which includes the 24 men's and women's Division I sports programs at Rutgers, New Brunswick, is estimated at 3% of the Q2 forecast. It is important to note that nearly 3/4 of the athletics overall forecast is supported through funds that are generated at the athletics program. Next slide. So let's turn to where the funds come from. This slide will show the difference from the 24 budget and the Q2 forecast, or what is known as the Q2 forecast. Approximately 27% of our revenues come from tuition and fee revenues. You can see that there is a slight difference here. Difference is primarily due to difference in the number of student enrollment that was anticipated when the FY24 budget was developed. The difference in enrollment levels can be seen in both the undergraduate and graduate student levels. Next category, just over 21% of the university revenues come from the state of New Jersey, some in unrestricted operating support that supports the core missions and operational cost, and a portion to cover the cost of fringe benefits for some of our employees that are on state paid lines. The next category is patient care services, which includes revenues from governmental payers, private insurers, our affiliated agreements for patient care services, which accounts for slightly over 20% for the FY24 Q2 forecast. The primary change in this revenue is linked to the anticipated reimbursement from the services provided. Since this is primarily linked to reimbursement, there is an equal amount of offset or less expense incurred. Jumping over to the sponsored research, so the last columns here, if you will, which includes grants and contracts from federal, state, and non-governmental entities, make up approximately 15.1% of the overall total projected revenues. And that was both for the budget and for the Q2 forecast. And rounding out the sources, all other sources of revenues is miscellaneous sources, which includes student, federal, state aid, auxiliary enterprises, athletics, gifts, and contributions, as well as endowment and investment income. This accounts for approximately 16.3% of the overall annual revenue. The increase that we see here is primarily associated with state student aid increase for the Garden State Guarantee. It's really how we learned of how it would be accounted for, so a change in from what was budgeted. Additional gifts and contributions have increased, and other sales and services that we see in terms of reimbursement for services provided. Next slide. So let's turn to the development of the FY 2025 budget. So going into first, start with the Rutgers budget process, and I'll kind of explain the full process and then talk about where we're at today. So we start with the months of July through December. During that time, guidance was provided by the University Budget Office to campuses and support units as they started to develop their budgets. The proposed changes were collected and reviewed and discussed in various committees. As we move into early winter and through spring, schools, centers, institutes, and other units are meeting with their respective chancellor offices and leadership. After those budgets are developed, they are consolidated to one total university budget and prepared for presentation to the Board of Governors. We are currently at the end of March, as you can see here. And right now, schools and centers and institutes are completing their budgets and completing their meetings with chancellor offices, and other support units are completing and refining their budgets as needed. From there, unit budgets will be consolidated at the campus level, and then the campuses or location level budgets are then consolidated to a total financial plan for Rutgers University. As we go into the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the state of New Jersey's budget process and then where we're at currently. So during the months of July through approximately February, the governor and the Office of Budget and Management, or OMB, review the administration's priorities. Updates are made to economic forecasts for revenue estimates that will support the state's annual financial obligations. In addition, requests from budget initiatives are sent to all state agencies during the fall. Rutgers developed its request and through the budget initiative forms, and were sent back to the state for review. These requests for additional resources are reviewed, and then proposed budget from the governor's administration is developed and then presented to the state legislature by late winter. So that just happened roughly about 3 weeks ago, or almost a month ago. The proposed budget moves into a budget deliberation and is reviewed by both the Senate and General Assembly. After the legislative process, the budget will then move into its final phase and be presented back to the governor after both legislative houses approve a budget bill. The governor can then either sign the proposed bill or can veto certain line items. Then during the month of June, the whole state, or we as a university, learn of the final budget from for the following fiscal year. We are at the end of March and currently in the beginning of the legislative budget deliberation process, where both the Senate and General Assembly starts their process to review and suggest changes to the governor's proposed budget. As we learn more as it relates to the development of the state budget and now that impacts the overall university budget, we will include those items into the Rutgers overall financial plan for FY 2025. Next slide. So in closing, I would like to say putting together forecasts and financial plans are huge pieces of work. This cannot be done without the tremendous work from the financial planners across the university. I would like to thank the dozens, if not hundreds of individuals throughout the university's department, schools, centers, and institutes, and other units who each had a piece of putting together these large pieces, or these large puzzles. And that what we will be then reviewing and have been able to review today. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We have time for questions for David or general questions. Aaron, how do we look? If you have a question, please use the Q&A function and we'll get through them.
Yes. So we'll start with one question that came in so far during David's presentation. How much of parking operation is funded from fees revenue?
So parking is a direct operation that is funded from, if you will, the parking revenue. So it's not necessarily coming from any type of student fee type activity. It's a parking revenue amount that's charged, and the exact amount I will make sure we get posted. I don't know the exact amount on that right now.
Okay, thanks, David. The next question will probably also, I'll need to put something in the chat when I'm not monitoring and speaking out loud, but I was trying to register for the Department of Education's online update today, but you have to be a member of NACUBO. How can we register?
Yeah, let me take that. So Rutgers is the member, no matter which unit you're at. You can register, and as long as your email address has at rutgers.edu, you're able to get in and then would be able to register for that particular webinar, and we'll get a link that we can put into that.
Yeah, I'm multitasking, but I'll drop in the link to the registration page for NACUBO so that if you don't already have a membership, you'll be able to set that up using, as Mike said, the Rutgers information as your institution. Next question, is the 3% for athletics high, low, or on par with other Big Ten institutions?
Go ahead, Mike.
It is between on par on the lower end of of the Big Ten.
Thank you. How are we managing the increase in student applications this year to help us increase revenue for the university? And are we able to accept a larger incoming class of freshmen?
So I know the enrollment folks are looking at not only the applications, but also to the increase of applications from the Common App. So certainly they are working through that and looking to fulfill a incoming class that is the right size for the university as we look at multiple things. Those students that have graduated or anticipated to graduate, those students that may have moved on to other things. So looking at multiple factors to bring into what will be an overall size of an incoming class. They're also looking at capacity as well. So that kind of looks at how many can actually come in that incoming class. Mike, did you have more?
Yeah, and this is particularly important for Newark and Camden, where we had capacity because of some turndowns of enrollment in the past couple of years. So we're looking to find a place at Rutgers for as many qualified students as we possibly can have. While I want to go back to something I reported on during the FAFSA discussion. I mentioned that there was a recent data issue, and it impacted 200,000 students out of about 6 million, at least that they can tell so far, that have been entered into the FAFSA system. The problem is we don't know how many of those 200,000 are coming to us. There's a process that we're going through iteratively with the Department of Education to identify any of those that impact us and to make sure we get the right data in. But this was the Education Department referred to it as a vendor issue in terms of not taking into account certain information from the FAFSA. Just to clarify that point. Aaron, other questions for David or in general?
Yes, perhaps we could bring the other panelists on as well, because I have some questions that have come in that also relate to their group. And while they get spotlighted, I'll ask this one. Is the 13% of sponsored research expenses the university's portion, or are grants covering this portion, or both? If grants covered a portion, what is the university's share that is not otherwise covered by grants?
Well, I think Chea may have some more detailed data, but I can tell you that from our recent HERB report, I can tell you that we do not get reimbursed for all the research expenditures that we put in. The university supports research beyond the dollars that come in through sponsored programs, that's for sure. Now, that's part of being a research university. That's fairly normal for being a research university. But Chea, I think we might have some high level data that could be from the HERD information.
Yeah, so the HERD is a good, I guess, indicator. We do report on unrecovered indirect costs. That is not a question I thought I was going to get this morning. What I can tell you that in general, I wouldn't assume that the expenditures that the university is covering would be in that 13%. David, please correct me if I'm wrong, because the university spends money to provide the infrastructure and in order for those activities to take place on the campus, hence the F&A rate. Our F&A rate right now is 57%, but I will tell you that when we propose, our actual rate that we proposed was somewhere in the mid 60s, about 65%. So the university is already covering that variance because the federal government negotiated us down to what we now have, which is the 57%. So that delta is part of what we're covering. So if we're at $1 billion, then you can think another 7% the institution is already putting in to cover the cost of the infrastructure to provide those activities. Additionally, cost share, while it is, again, the HERD survey is just the research and development. It doesn't cover the instruction or the other sponsored activities. So we do put in quite a bit we cover quite a bit of the expenditures in order to provide that, in addition to the cost share that the institution is responsible for if it is included as part of the awards that are received. I add to that, I saw someone asked about increasing fringe costs. I was hoping that wouldn't come up today. But yeah, I just in order to even have this infrastructure, the institution is spending money. It would be across all of those categories because all of those categories are included in the FNA rate. I don't have the actual numbers for you, but if Mike assigns that to me, we'll get that.
Got other things for you to do first. I'll take the question about the fringe relief. So fringe benefit expenses have been a serious issue for this university. We are responsible for providing reimbursement for fringe benefit expenses for approximately 7,000 positions throughout the university. This is a large number relative to the other higher education institutions in the state. What that means is that we have over 11,000 positions for which we do not need to respond or reimburse the state, but the 7,000 that we do. And the 7,000 translates into figures that get into the high $200 millions and maybe even to 300 million this year. It's a lot of money. Fringe benefit rates have been increasing dramatically in the last 5 years. I think 5 years ago, we were at about 43%. Fringe rate next year, we will be a titch over 80%, not counting the discounting of the federal sponsored rate that we were able to institute this year. And the cause of that increase is the cost of our health plan. We are typically in state employee healthcare program. That plan is a very expensive program, and the recovery of the costs of that program is through the fringe benefit rate to all state entities. That has been putting a lot of pressure on to the rate. The other factor has to do with the unfunded pension plan, the defined benefit plan that the state has had. A prior governor quit putting dollars into it on an annual basis, provided a real hole in terms of dollars to cover the actuarially determined benefits that would be needed from it. And this administration and the last administration have been putting in more money each year to fill that hole. This is the so-called PERS system, for which an increasingly small number of Rutgers employees are part of it. But nonetheless, we, through the fringe benefit reimbursement to the state, contribute to filling that hole, or a portion of that hole. And it's proportioned to the number of our employees, but it's still a big number. Those two things have pressured the rate. And yes, we are trying a number of different activities with the state to try to get relief. We did get relief last year. A little under $50 million came to us to help reduce the fringe rate for federally sponsored programs. That was a big benefit, but it did not give us any relief from either non-federally sponsored programs or from non-sponsored programs like our regular operations. So we're working on a number of fronts to try to get relief from the state, but it's a major challenge for us.
Thank you, Mike. The next question is for G2. Currently, iLab software modules at Rutgers invoice based on scheduled usage for instrumentation time. Is there any investigation into purchasing iLab modules that interface with instrumentation to bill on actual usage time?
Thank you, Aaron. Yes, that's a very nice question. So the module you're talking about is called as Interlock. Right now, I'm in discussion with Agilent about adding that to our software. So hopefully I'll have some good news in the future to share.
Thank you, G2. This is a question that was submitted at the end of Chea and G2's presentation. So I believe it relates to the recharge centers. What happens if there is a surplus at the end of the year?
So I'll take this one. We review the rates on a 2-year basis. The accounting projects that are set up are rolling accounts. I don't know what they're specifically called here at the institution, but required to be zeroed out at the end of each fiscal year. The balances will roll over to the following fiscal year, similar to a sponsored account. At the end of 2 years, when it's time for your biennial review, if you have a surplus, we do a review of the source of that surplus. So a couple of things can happen. If you've had a lot of external activity, which you really shouldn't have, by the way, but if you have that, we look at how much overhead was charged on those rates and make a determination on what to do with those funds. The funds, regardless, are supposed to be reinvested back into the core or service center operation. They're not supposed to be transferred out to the department, again, as a way to subsidize those operations. So there is a review that is done depending on the source of those surpluses. We would either possibly transfer some out. If you have equipment, that equipment depreciation is in your rates. We could move that surplus to an equipment reserve that could be used to repair or replace the capital equipment that is being charged for. In most cases, the service center or core facility is allowed to keep an operational surplus of no more than 2 months of their annual activity. So if that surplus exceeds that, we would roll that into the new rate structure, so it would make your rates go down. So there are multiple options depending on, which is why we do these reviews. We need to see what the source of that is and determine if the rates are too high, or if you just have like an excess of external activity, or if it is just the result of your equipment generating revenue that doesn't have an offset of expenses. So there's multiple options. If you're curious about that, you have a service center, you're saying a surplus, feel free to reach out to my office and we can take a look at the activity at any time, even if you're not at a point where you have to be reviewed.
Thank you, Chea. David, there was the question earlier about the parking, and I understand you have some additional detail.
Yes, thank you, Aaron. So thank you for giving me enough time to kind of look up parking total revenues to the FY24 Q2 is approximately 14.3 million. So just wanted to get that information there. Thank you.
Great. Last but not least, at least currently, my last but not least question is also for Chea and G2 from an individual saying, I have a proposed technology that can service across service centers, specifically drone services for both academic research and campus-wide law enforcement. Do you have thoughts on this, or how it could be the focus of a newly created core facility?
I'm gonna defer to G2 because if I were to get this email, I'd send it over to the Office for Research. Because I tend to focus on the financial side versus the very scientific above my head scientific side. So G2.
I would say we should have a separate discussion offline because there's a lot more detail we would need to figure out if it can be set up as a core.
Great. Thank you. That's all we have for questions currently, panelists. Thank you so much for taking the time to walk through all of those.
I think I saw one more just actually came in, but it's not for me.
Oh, yep. Thank you. Can you advise some schools or programs that have increased in size because of the current environment, AI, chip manufacturing, immigration law, etc.? Not sure.
I'm not sure.
If that's a budget related question or.
Yeah, if the person who issued that could notice as anonymous can send in something or send to Aaron something that's more detailed in what your question is. We'll be happy to respond to it.
Yeah, and I do have one more. Can a recharge center generating less than $25,000 become a core if they have a specific need for the iLab software?
So I will say that the 25,000 is the threshold that we set in order to become a service center. If there is a need because of the level of activity, so you're doing this a lot, but you're not generating 25,000, it's a conversation we can have if we need to set you up. Because the level of activity, the how many times this is happening within a year could delineate the need for us to make an exception to that. Again, for the policy, we set the threshold for what we do and do not have, what we will and will not have oversight over. It's more of a risk factor. But again, if it is an activity that is happening multiple times a year, then we could consider setting it up as a service center or a core facility. The need for lab would be a discussion with the Office for Research at that point.
Thank you, Chea. And I want to thank all the presenters, David, Chea, G2. I want to thank Aaron for hosting today, and thanks to all of you who attended. We had almost 500 by count, and I think that's a great turnout. Remember that the Ask the Expert sessions will begin at 10:30. Please refer to your email and the chat for details and links. Let's get those links in there. Please also consider the NACUBA webinar today. If you're asked about your affiliation, put down whether you're attached to New Brunswick. If you're an RBHS, pick New Brunswick. You can also say Newark or Camden, whichever one is appropriate for you. They're all good. They're all active. If it asks for an affiliation as you register. Also, please mark your calendars for our Cornerstone Forum on April the 1st. That's this coming Monday. A lot of good information about a lot of very important systems initiatives that are going on, and we'll provide any updates to the financial aid information that we have by then. And it literally is coming in day by day. Finally, we'll share the survey link. Please fill this out. We value all feedback and suggestions. We also would love to have suggestions for guest speakers, people within the institution as it relates to university operations and finance that you would like to hear from. If you put them into the survey, we will certainly look to see about doing that in a future town hall. And with that, I want to close this town hall. Thanks again for attending. The link to the survey is in the chat. There'll also be information sent out. We will post the recording materials and answers to questions to the UFA website as they're processed. So with that, we'll call it close. Thank you again.